Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Activated the Erasure Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. It was a few days after the sports festival. They already had filed for their internships and Mr. Aizawa had finally been allowed to remove all of his bandages. Izuku's stomach had clenched at the sight, feeling guilty that he hadn't been able to do more to help his teacher. Actually, Izuku hadn't done anything other than get in the way. Maybe if he hadn't have been such a useless Deku, then his teacher wouldn't have been left with the prominent scar under his right eye. The first teacher who had ever treated Izuku like he was a person, who had not dismissed him as useless, almost died. And Izuku had been powerless to help, almost as if he was still quirkless. They hadn't been in school that long, but he still felt close to his homeroom teacher. Even if it was only because Izuku had a quirk now and wasn't considered useless to the general public, the man made time for him. It wasn't like Mr. Aizawa was taking him under his wing or adopting him. That would be crazy. No, it was the little things that might seem unnecessary or insignificant to others that had taken root in Izuku's heart. That filled the part of him that longed to have the acceptance of a teacher, of an adult, someone who wasn't obligated to care about him like his mother or All Might were. Those little things meant the world to the child that had been shunned all his life, and he doubted his teacher even realized the impact he was having. The little encouraging squeezes to his shoulder as his teacher passed by when handing out their graded papers. The way he would call on Izuku to answer a question, even though his hand was never raised, not mocking him when he got an answer wrong, and giving an approving nod when he answered right. The small glimmer of concern in his eyes when he noticed that Izuku was feeling overly anxious. And on those days he would leave Izuku in his little bubble during class, not calling on him or drawing attention to him, and slipping a piece of licorice to him before he left the class to another teacher. None of the other teachers seemed to focus on him the way Mr. Aizawa did, never stopping to actually listen to what Izuku had to say as if it was important the way he did. And the gruff man actually kept Kachin from attacking him, even reprimanded him. He's never had a teacher do that before. Never knew anyone who looked at his childhood friend and saw anything less than perfection. He had also never had a teacher show such concern for his safety either. He's not talking about at the USJ where Mr. Aizawa had thrown himself into the fight against the villains to protect his students. Although that had been the bravest thing he had ever seen. Braver even than All Might's debut. It was at the sports festival, after his fight with Todoroki. The way his teacher had been there after he had woken up, righteous fury at Izuku's recklessness. Had warned Izuku against hurting himself like that. Had lectured until Izuku thought his ears would fall off. Then as quick as he was leaving, with a parting pat on his head and licorice slipped into his hand, his teacher slipped away telling the problem child not to scare him like that again. Maybe Mr. Aizawa was like this with all his other classmates, he didn't know for sure. The man was very subtle. And Izuku was too scared to draw attention to himself by asking. Not wanting to look like the weirdo who was overly touched by his teacher's kindness. And even if he was treating Izuku just like any other student, it still meant a lot to him. Izuku sighed and rubbed at his eyes. They had been feeling dry for a few days now. Burning. No matter how much sleep he got, or how much he rubbed at them, they still bothered him. Maybe it was allergies? All he knew was that they hurt and it was beginning to give him a headache. A headache that was intensifying as the explosive blonde activated his quirk. Letting small pops dance across his palms as he growled at Kaminari over something he had said. Kachin was being really sensitive since his win at the sports festival. Really, they should have just let the blonde refuse. He was not happy with it, and who would it have hurt to just skip him and give the others their medals? It's not like Kachin wanted his. It was getting annoying as the loud boy in front of him kept getting louder. He could see where Mr. Aizawa's eyebrow was twitching in agitation as he watched silently behind his podium, shuffling through papers. It wouldn't be long before the man made the teen quiet down. Izuku glared at his childhood friend, wishing he would stop using his quirk in class. A quirk that still made Izuku flinch every now and then from painful memories. His eyes burned more as he glared unblinkingly at Kachin, who stopped using his quirk all of a sudden. Kachin glanced at their teacher quickly before looking around, confused eyes landing on Izuku before widening in shock. Deku! What the F dash? Kachin screeched. Shoyuta was standing at the podium, shuffling through his students' last test. Some had done better than others, while some failed abysmally. He was ignoring the loud ruckus from Bakugo. For now. The kid had been snapping at people all morning, and as long as he didn't actually blow anything up, then he could ignore it for the moment. He really didn't want to deal with the explosive teen right then. His mind was more preoccupied on thoughts concerning the problem child. Midoriya had been very quiet this morning, avoiding conversation with his friends under the excuse that he had a headache. The kid clearly looked like he was in pain, and his eyes were almost as bloodshot as Shuta's own. He was seriously considering dismissing him from class and sending him to Recovery Girl to get checked over. She would at least be able to do something about the headache and maybe his eyes too. Shoyuta was just flipping through the last of the tests, getting them in order to be passed out. Maybe he should do it himself, slip Midoriya a licorice, and send him off to Recovery Girl in one go. The popping of Bakugo's quirk stopped and Shoyuta sighed in relief that the kid was finally calmed down, only to snap his head up as the teen screeched, Deku! What the F dash? Shoyuta looked immediately to the problem child, knowing that Deku was a cruel nickname the blonde called him. Midoriya was glaring at Bakugo. Well, as much as a cinnamon roll can glare, but that's not what had everyone's attention. It was his fluffy green hair floating up like he was underwater, and the piercing red eyes. An occurrence that was very familiar to all of them, considering it was Shuta's tell that he was using his quirk. And Midoriya was using Erasure. He could tell by the way Bakugo's arms and palms flexed as he tried and failed to activate explosion. Midoriya looked startled at Bakugo's outburst and looked around in wide-eyed confusion at all his classmates that were gaping at him. What's wrong? Gee guys? Why are you all staring at me? Midoriya stuttered, something Shoyuta had thought was finally fading as he got used to his classmates. Midoriya! Shoyuta called, drawing the red-eyed stare towards him. Blink! Midoriya started at him for a fraction of a second before he complied, and winced. Shoyuta knew that feeling all too well. Shoyuta moved from around his podium and made his way over to the door. You all have a free study PRD starting now. Ida is in charge and will pass out your tests. Midoriya, come with me. He called over his shoulder as he opened the classroom door and waited for his student to scuttle out before closing it on the for once silent class. He walked down the hallway a bit before stopping and rummaging through one of the pockets on his utility belt, pulling out his small bottle of eye drops. Tilt your head back and close your eyes. Midoriya was quick to obey, knowing what Shoyuta held in his hand and dying to have some relief for his eyes. Shoyuta cupped Midoriya's cheek to steady himself, and dripped 2 drops of the medicine in the corners of both of the kid's eyes. He knew from experience that anyone who wasn't used to having to use eye drops would blink before the medicine dropped or flinch away. Dropping them in the corners of closed eyes and then using his fingers to open the closed lids to allow the liquid in was the easiest way. He lifted Izuku's lids and tilted the boy's face around to let the liquid slide over his dry eyes. As an afterthought, he closed Midoriya's eyes back and gently rubbed his thumb over his lids, helping the liquid to seep in more and adding comforting pressure to ease the soreness away. Once done, he let go of his student's face and backed away. Midoriya straightened up and opened his eyes slowly, blinking a few times as his eyes naturally began to produce tears to help moisten his eyes up more. But Midoriya, Shoyuta said sternly, drawing the boy's attention and causing him to cower slightly under his deep gaze. Care to explain to me how you were using Erasure? Midoriya looked at him, mouth agape as he processed what Shoyuta had just said. What now? Shoyuta sighed and rubbed at the back of his neck. He was worried that the kid wouldn't know what he had done, but it sure would have made things easier if he had at least had some kind of clue. Because Shoyuta was stumped too. The boy's quirk was super strength. So how the hell had he managed to use Shuta's quirk? Kid, you were using Erasure to erase Bakugo's quirk. It's why your eyes are so dry right now. Midoriya tucked his fist under his chin in thought. How can that be? My quirk isn't anything related to erasure. That should be impossible. Shoyuta nodded and grabbed him by the elbow, steering him in the direction of Recovery Girl. That's what I'd like to know too. Maybe Recovery Girl will be able to shed some light onto this. They rounded a corner and almost ran into Present Mike. Shoyuta grunted in greeting and tried to walk around his friend and fellow hero. Mike, who didn't have a class at the moment, changed direction to tag along with them. Sho, where you going? Did the little listener already break something this early in the morning? His friend asked, way too chipper for Shuta's taste. Mike walked alongside Midoriya, openly looking over his student to see if there were any obvious injuries. Midoriya blushed, indignant that Mike automatically assumed he had hurt himself, and frowned at the floor. The kid was not comfortable enough yet with the other teachers to argue or sass them in good nature like the other students. At least he seemed comfortable enough with Shoyuta to actually talk some, even if it was short sentences about things school-related. Although he did ask Shoyuta once about how his scarf worked. Magic had clearly not been what the kid was expecting him to say. Shoyuta wasn't too sure how it worked himself, he just knew it had something to do with responding to Shuta's brainwaves and a lot of skill. Midoriya used erasure during class and neither of us know how he did that. Shoyuta huffed. It could be anything really, but he wanted to get Recovery Girl's medical opinion before he jumped to any conclusions. If anyone could pinpoint the cause, it would be her. It was most likely the result of someone accidentally using their quirk on or to round Midoriya. Mike stopped in his tracks, shocked, before rushing to catch up with them. What the hell? His loud friend yelled, making Midoriya flinch and Shoyuta slouch even more in an attempt to escape his friend's loud voice and curious stare. The blonde man looked back and forth between Midoriya and Shoyuta, before whispering, "You don't think this is another way of the LV messing with us?" Midoriya wrapped his arms around himself and Shoyuta relinquished his hold on his student's elbow. They were just coming into view of the nurse's office. It's a possibility, but I doubt it. Whatever it is, it seems harmless. I can still feel my quirk, so I know it wasn't transferred to him. The possibilities are endless, but if anyone can figure it out, it will be Shizenji. Shoyuta pushed open the nurse's door and ushered Midoriya inside. Shizenji looked up from her files and looked at the three of them before her gaze settled on Midoriya. She huffed and hopped down off her chair, tottering over to them. "What now?" she asked, glaring at the two adults accusingly, like it was somehow their fault for the most accident-prone student was back in her office. Hizashi nudged Midoriya over to an empty cot while Shoyuta explained. Somehow, Midoriya was able to use my quirk during class. He doesn't know how this happened. Shizenji nodded her head and wandered over to Midoriya. So do you think that he may have been hit with some unknown quirk that allowed him to copy your quirk? She asked. That's what it seems like. He admitted, leaning against the open door. Mike wandered over to a chair and flopped gracelessly onto it, spreading out his long legs as he observed everyone. Midoriya, do you remember being hit by a quirk or feeling strange at all recently? Recovery Girl asked, using her grandmotherly tone she reserved for people when they weren't being F-ups. Midoriya shook his head no before pausing. Well, for a few days my eyes have felt really dry. But that could be because of Mr. Aizawa's quirk. I thought it was allergies, but other than that, nothing. Sorry. Recovery Girl patted his knee and wandered over to her cabinet that contained medical equipment. Don't apologize, dearie. You've done nothing wrong. She rummaged around in her cabinet before she found what she wanted. It was a scanner that most hospitals had that could scan the brain and show if someone was under the effects of someone else's quirk. It was an expensive device that scanned a person's brain waves. When a person is under a quirk that controls them or alters them in some way, different parts of the brain will be affected and will show more activity than is normal. It also shows the affects of a person using their own quirk, letting them watch as a person's brain waves changed in response to the quirk's activation. She held the small device up and scanned Midoriya's head. She looked at the screen, then looked at Midoriya, before looking at the screen again. A deep frown settling on her face. Shoyuta looked at her growing confusion and asked when he couldn't control his curiosity anymore. What's wrong? She looked at him before looking back at his student. Shoyuta, he isn't under the impression of another quirk. She held up the scanner again to Izuku's head. I need you to activate Erasure again. Midoriya was looking between the device and Shoyuta, confused and a little frightened over the fact that he wasn't under someone else's quirk. That it was all him. Honestly, Shoyuta was just as confused as Midoriya. His student gulped before glancing over at present Mike, who had been silent the entire time and watching them all intensely, and activated. Erasure. Mike opened his mouth to let out a quirk-induced shout, only for a normal volume one to come out. He tried a few more times before letting Midoriya deactivate Erasure. Freaky, Mike whispered, leaning back in his chair and rubbing at his mustache, something he was prone to do while thinking. Shizenji turned to Shoyuta and Hizashi and made shooing motions. Out, the both of you. I need to run a few more tests. Mike launched from his seat and scurried out of the room. He had always been afraid of the little woman since they were in school, and he had accidentally deafened his whole class temporarily, and she had yelled at him for his carelessness. Shoyuta nodded his head and calmly left the room, letting them know that they would be waiting outside. Izuku sat on the bed nervously as Recovery Girl pulled up his file. He still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that this wasn't the cause of someone else's rogue quirk, but he himself doing this. He was quirkless before All Might gave him his power. This was physically impossible. That's what I would like to know too. Recovery Girl muttered. He had said that out loud. Recovery Girl pulled up the hated X-ray of his toe from when he was 4 and turned the screen to him. This clearly shows that you have the double toe joint that is associated with all quirkless people, which is proof that you should not be showing signs of a quirk that isn't OFA. Izuku nodded his head. I know. So how is this possible? And why Erasure of all things? Recovery Girl sighed. I would like to take another X-ray of your toe. Something just isn't adding up. The X-ray didn't take much time, and soon an image was being uploaded onto the computer. And it was startling to both of them, although Recovery Girl did have her suspicions. There on the screen, clear as day, was Izuku's toe that did not have a double joint. What? Recovery Girl scowled and looked over to the shocked teen. Midoriya, you were never quirkless. It was just very late in revealing itself. I'm going to have a colleague come in who can examine your quirk. They can see what exactly a quirk is and explain to you in depth about Erasure. Although, I'm sure Aizawa can help you with that as well. But we don't know for sure if it's exactly like his or not. But for now, I suggest you don't use it too much. Your body isn't used to the dry eye yet. I have a bone to pick with the idiot doctor that lied to you. When I get my hands on them, they'll be lucky if they are allowed to doctor animals. Izuku just stared at her in shock as she called his teachers back in. He had a quirk that was all his. He had Erasure. He had Erasure. Shoyuta and Mike ambled back into the room when they were called. A X-ray of Midoriya's foot was on the screen. He looked at the boy who looked like he was in shock. Not surprising, finding out you have another quirk that was completely unrelated to the other must be mind-boggling. Mike went and slumped back in his seat, looking over at Midoriya in concern. If he kept his mouth hanging open like that, he was bound to catch a fly. Shoyuta walked over to Midoriya and pushed his mouth closed. The kid didn't so much as react, staring vacantly at the X-ray. He was starting to get concerned that his student was going into shock and was about to ask Shizenji for a shock blanket when she spoke. Aizawa, I need you to be honest with me. Shoyuta looked at her in confusion. When wasn't he honest with her? He had known her since he was a teenager stumbling through life and into the hero course. Is Midoriya Izuku your illegitimate love child? What? Mike and Midoriya shrieked at the same time. He would be glad the kid was finally reacting, but now it seemed he was going into shock too. No way, RG. Mike yelled, jumping to his feet and pointing wildly at Shoyuta, who just stood there dumbly. Should as gay as hell. Has always been. And what you're suggesting would mean that in some effed-up way, a 14-year-old Shoyuta and adult Mrs. Midoriya conceived a child together. Normally Shoyuta would have been said that Mike had outed him in front of his student, but it felt like he was drowning in a sea of, what the F dash. Shizenji pointed her cane at Mike and ground out, I know that. But the fact is that Midoriya has Erasure. Is only showing signs of Erasure. If it were a copy quirk, Then why Shoyuta? Why and how did he copy his quirk? Why not his classmates or his mother? He's around them more. Shoyuta looked down at Midoriya, who seemed aghast at the idea that she thought Shoyuta could be his father. Not that he didn't care for his reckless problem child. But he wasn't Shuta's child. Cover your ears. Shoyuta told Midoriya. The teen hurriedly pressed his hands tightly over his ears, and Shoyuta added his own too before whispering over his shoulder to Shizenji. I know for a fact that I have never slept with a woman and have only ever been with men. He glanced over to Mike, who was nodding his head. There is no way he is my child. No way at all. There has to be another explanation. He removed his hands from Midoriya's ears, tugging the teen's hands down too. Mike rubbed at his mustache again, tugging at the corner of one as he thought. But how is he using Erasure? If it is a copy quirk, then why you show? Did you come into contact with him at all today? Shoyuta and Midoriya both shook their heads. Shizenji sighed and hopped back up onto her chair. Well, I'll send a message to my colleague who can identify quirks by looking at a person. I trust them, and I know they will be able to tell us what exactly is going on and why it's only happening now. I'll get them to come over as soon as they can. Shoyuta nodded and looked down at his student. Shoyuta sat his hand on Midoriya's shoulder and crouched down to look him in the eyes. We'll figure this mess out. But for now, just stay in here. I'm sure you don't want your friends bombarding you with questions you don't know the answer to. Midoriya nodded his head and twisted his fingers together, another nervous habit the kid seemed to have. Are you going back to the class? Midoriya asked softly. He saw Mike smirk at him before quietly leaving the room with Shizenji. He had planned on going back and trying to resume what was left of his homeroom before he needed to move on for the day. But the kid's hesitant tone implied that he didn't want Shoyuta to leave him alone after everything that had happened. Midoriya trusted him, and he didn't want to do anything to break that trust. He could tell from the short amount of time that he had known the kid that he was probably bullied, why he had no clue, and didn't seem to truly trust the adults around him. Somebody had hurt this kid enough to make him this timid and untrusting. Shoyuta would not add to that hurt, even if it was logical for him to resume his responsibilities. But he figured it wouldn't hurt to make Midoriya his top priority for the day. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. Shoyuta lied, patting the kid on the head as he made his way over to the chair Mike had vacated. Midoriya seemed relieved that Shoyuta was staying. So he slouched down in the chair and drifted into a light sleep as the problem child fiddled with his phone, waiting for the colleague to arrive. Shoyuta, Mike, Midoriya, and Shizenji all sat there in shock as the quirk specialist explained to them what Midoriya's quirk was. Both Shoyuta and Midoriya were blushing embarrassedly from the explanation, while Mike rocked with laughter and Shizenji smiled softly. Midoriya's quirk was a mixture of a bonding and copying quirk. Basically, whoever the kid formed a strong attachment to, it didn't work on family, he would bond to them and be able to copy their quirk. Midoriya had somehow gotten attached enough to Shoyuta that he formed a bond and was able to copy Erasure. He had bonded with Shoyuta. It was a little awkward when Mike stopped laughing long enough to ask Midoriya why he had never bonded with anyone else before. It was awkward because Midoriya hesitated in telling them. Then it was sad and infuriating to hear that because he was such a late bloomer that everyone assumed that he was quirkless. And because of that, he was bullied. His only friend had been Bakugo, but the boy quickly turned on him and that had ended their friendship. If Bakugo hadn't have turned on probably the best friend he could have ever had, Shuta's sure that Midoriya would have bonded with him. Maybe a bond even had began to form, if Midoriya's attachment to the boy was any indication, but the betrayal had probably broken it. Midoriya had a quirk that had the potential to be very powerful, if he was able to learn to trust others more and bond with them. The kid did not seem to have trouble making friends or getting along with others. Hell, maybe the reason his quirk was so similar to All Might's was because he had unknowingly bonded to the big buffoon. He could see how Midoriya would assume that his quirk was super strength if that was the case. The kid just needed to learn to trust. But there was plenty of time for that. For now he would continue to watch over the kid and train him on how best to use his quirk. The specialist told him that he would keep Erasure for as long as he was bonded with Shoyuta. Not like Shoyuta would do anything to break that bond. It was nice to know that his student trusted him so much. He's not sure he's ever had a student that felt any type of fondness for him before. They respected him, but they were always too intimidated by him. Despite the fact that as their homeroom teacher he had to basically act as an extra parent. Midoriya bonding to him was kind of flattering, knowing just the kind of good impact he was making on his student's life. The specialist also told them that he could just relax his quirk and Erasure would slip into the depths of his quirk, waiting to be called on again. Midoriya sighed as he relaxed his quirk and the dry eye faded. It was lunchtime, and as much as he dreaded the teasing from students and teachers about this new revelation, he knew it couldn't be kept secret forever. So he shooed Midoriya off to lunch and told him he was in fact allowed to tell all of his annoying friends. Just like Mike was going to do with theirs. Shoyuta sat dejectedly in the teacher's lounge, wrapped up in his sleeping bag in a corner and sipping on a jelly pouch. Mike and Midnight were bursting at the seams with laughter. All at his expense. Midnight tore herself away from Mike and staggered over to him, drunk on the hilarity of the situation. Shoyuta, you should know better than to try and keep your child a secret from your friends. You can't keep him all to yourself. Mike snickered behind his hand as Shoyuta glared at his friends. The other teachers were keeping their laughter hidden. But he knew they were laughing. Midnight. Shoyuta growled, eyes flashing red. You know that he isn't my kid. Midnight wiped away the tears in the corners of her eyes and smiled devilishly at him. Oh sweetie, you are wrong. So very wrong. Mike snorted and joined in. Yes, Sho, think about it. Midoriya was so fond of you that it formed a bond. Students don't just bond with their grumpy teachers. Not unless. No, Shoyuta denied. They see you as a parent. Midnight finished. Shoyuta buried his face in his hands. You're wrong. He groaned. The +18 hero crouched down and patted him on the top of his head in fake sympathy. Sorry baby, but you know we're right. Welcome so fatherhood Shoyuta. Mike teased. He knew that Shoyuta had given up on the idea of ever having children on his own or even adopting. Being secretly gay and an underground hero with many enemies just made being a father nothing more than a dream. He knew Mike was probably secretly happy that in a strange way, Shoyuta was getting what he always wanted. A kid. Shoyuta knew that the kid would bond with other adults, was probably bonded with All Might. But he couldn't stop the soft flutter in his heart that liked the idea that Midoriya might consider him a father figure. No, it was better to not get his hopes up. Midoriya was his student. Just his student. So when are we adopting him? Mike questions him quickly as he gave Shoyuta juice box in place of his empty jelly pouch. I don't know. He responds automatically. Damn it Hisashi. So. Uraraka nudges Izuku in the arms and waggles her eyebrows at him. Does this mean you kind of see Mr. Aizawa like a dad? Izuku shrugged as he ate his rice, not paying much attention to the conversation due to how embarrassed he still was over the whole thing and having to tell his troll friends. At least Ida hadn't overreacted like everyone else. Just spouting facts about why Mr. Aizawa was worthy of bonding with. I guess I do. I can't remember my dad. And Mr. Aizawa is very dad-like. I guess I wouldn't mind him being my dad. Everyone at the table awed at him all at once with the faint whisper of, secret love child, from Todoroki. Izuku's mind caught up with what his mouth had just said and blushed so hard he got dizzy as the blood rushed right to his head. What have I just done? No one noticed Snipe rush out of the cafeteria squealing like a little country girl as he skipped to the teacher's lounge to relay what he had just heard. Izuku and Shoyuta had permanent blushes for a week after that, but neither could find it in their hearts to be upset over it. Izuku stared down at his new quirk registration form. No longer did it say super strength, but instead had his new quirk information and the name he had chosen for it. Quirk Bond. Sure, it was simple, but so was the name he had chosen to give OFA. He had never been good at giving things names. He can recall with clarity and embarrassment the hero names he had dreamed of going by when he was just a kid. Mighty Boy. All Might Jr. He let his head fall forward with a thunk onto the coffee table he was seated at. He hoped no ink from the freshly printed document got on his forehead. But he was too gone in his own internal embarrassment to lift his head and slide the document over. Are you okay, sweetie? His mom called from behind him. He made a sound that could be considered an affirmative. It seemed to placate her, and he listened as she shuffled back into the kitchen, off to cook up another over-the-top meal, her way of saying sorry. While Izuku had been stewing over his mixed feelings of having had a quirk this entire time, feelings such as anger, hurt, sorrow, regret, his mother had also been stewing. But her feelings were far more straightforward. Guilt. She felt immensely guilty for his suffering. Though it was not her fault. The fault lay with the doctor who, through either incompetence or cruelty, had ruined his youth with an incorrect X-ray image. His mother had been apologizing since she had heard the news. She apologized for not seeking a second opinion. He forgave her. They were both in shock at the time. She was a first-time mother and didn't have her own mother to turn to for advice. She trusted the word of a doctor. Someone who is supposed to be competent and have the patient's well-being in mind. She apologized for not believing in his dream of not believing in him. He forgave her of that too. Isn't it a mother's job to worry for her children and protect them? She did what she thought was best. She didn't encourage what she thought was a suicidal goal. It hurt. But sometimes parents have to be the bad guy in their children's eyes. And it's not like she told him no. She was sorry, because she couldn't support his dream. And that was fine. He wasn't the first child to try to achieve what parents thought impossible. At least she didn't hinder him. She signed all the paperwork for him to take the entrance exams and to attend the school when he passed. She even made him a costume. And she had started making it before he ever even gained All Might's quirk. Back when he was still quirkless and had only his resolve and intellect to rely on. She might not have believed he would become a hero, but she was willing to let him try. Despite her fears. She apologized for not realizing how bad the bullying had gotten. Izuku sighed and felt the paper under his face flutter. That had been a huge can of worms. Her finding out he had been relentlessly bullied. She had cried. And so had he. Cursed the Midoriya tears. Then she had raged and he had to block the door to keep her from storming Aldra and giving them a piece of her mind. She hadn't been friends with Bakuga Mitsuki for so many years without learning a thing or two from the hot-tempered woman. But he had placated her and her ire had faded, replaced once again with guilt. To be honest, he didn't want her anywhere near his old school and all who attended there. No one knew the full extent of the bullying. He had downplayed it for Mr. Aizawa when he asked. And he had downplayed it even more for his mother. She had been devastated to learn he and Kacchan weren't friends anymore and that he had been mean to Izuku. They could never know just how easily Kacchan had turned on him. He couldn't risk them finding out just how bad Kacchan had gotten. They could never find out about that day. The smell of chicken stir-fry filled the air, and he lifted his head to sniff. It smelled wonderful. His registration paper had apparently stuck to his head and he jumped a little in his seated position when the paper flopped over and obscured his vision. He puffed his cheeks out in a pout and pulled the offending paper from his head. He checked it over, relieved that none of the fresh ink had smeared and placed it back down on the table for his mom to put away with the rest of their important documents. He heaved himself up, legs shaky and prickly as blood flow returned to them. He had been sitting on them for too long. He stretched his arms over his head as he padded, barefoot, into the kitchen. Really should be wearing slippers, but he had tossed one at the TV when an offending news station had spouted misinformation on the casualty and injury report regarding the mudslide in Kyoto. They were downplaying things and assuring the public that everything was under control. But tweets from residents said the exact opposite. Currently only the Wild Pussycats and Iwabami were working on recovery and they were having a hard time. He shook the memory from his mind and let his arms fall to his side. His mom was at the counter, plating the stir-fry and some rice. He glomped onto her back and rested his chin on her shoulder. She was warm and smelled of skis and the lavender detergent she loved. She smelled as she always had, and it was comforting to him and reminded him of being a small child and all the times she would carry him around their little apartment as they played. It felt like such a long time since they had last spent time together. He had grown distant from her in his last few years of middle school, trying his best to hide bruises and his depression. And she had kept her distance, not wanting to crowd him or smother him. Being a single mother to a teenage boy couldn't be easy. It was nice that they seemed to be getting back to a normal state. He pulled away from her and took the plate she offered him and made his way to his seat at the table. She was quick to join him, and after quickly giving thanks, they dug in. He couldn't help but smile as he ate. Her cooking always made him happy. Their peace was disturbed by a knock at the door. It was a Saturday, and as far as he knew, they weren't expecting any visitors. He motioned his mom to stay seated and excused himself from the table to answer the door. She had worked hard on their meal and shouldn't have to get up to answer the door. It was probably just a salesman. It was the time of year for them. Not too cold, not too hot. The Genken was chilly to his bare feet, seeing as it was level with the door and the cool air from outside was able to seep through the bottom of the door. He'd have to see about getting that fixed soon. With a click of the deadbolt, he unlocked the door and pulled it open enough to look out, but not enough that a pushy salesperson could slip in uninvited. He was ready to send the person on their way politely, but was stunned to find his homeroom teacher slouching and looking sleep-deprived. He idly noticed a man he had never seen before in a fedora and brown trench coat behind his teacher, but was too bewildered by a scenario he had never considered before. A teacher visiting home. He knows they do that. It's part of their job to do home visits, but usually later in the year around exams or during third year to discuss employment or college. But he had never had a teacher bother to come to his home before. What was the protocol for this? And why so early in the year? The protocol, problem child, is to let us in. Mr. Aizawa sighed, clearly unimpressed with his panic. Izuku let out a startled meep at realizing he had been mumbling and quickly bowed them inside and apologized. He heard a soft huff of laughter from his teacher and a ruffle to his hair as Mr. Aizawa passed him and set about removing his boots at the Genkan. The other man followed suit, a broad smile on his tired face. Quickly shutting the door and bolting it again, he skirted around the two men and dashed off to the kitchen to inform his mom of their company before dashing off again to grab spare slippers for the two. He was quick to return, which had his teacher rolling his eyes fondly. It was strange to know the difference and even stranger to have that fondness directed towards him. He was still coming to terms with his quirk and the fact that he had bonded with Mr. Aizawa for goodness sake, and that the man accepted him and seemed to care for him. Relax. Mr. Aizawa soothed in his gruff voice, taking the offered slippers and sliding into them. You are not in trouble. We can talk about why we're here inside, away from the door. It was a mild reprimand, but Izuku still flushed in shame at his poor manners. The stranger bumped Mr. Aizawa with his elbow and laughed at the disgruntled look he received from the man. Cut the kid some slack, Eraser. I was struck dumb the first time you showed up at my door too. No one expects to open their door to a hobo with the personality of a scalded cat. The man bowed respectfully, which Izuku returned. He tried to hide his twitching lips, but his teacher's raised eyebrow let him know that he knew Izuku found the description hilariously accurate. I'm Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. And nice to meet you. Izuku stuttered. He felt very underdressed in just a t-shirt with the words, bikini, written on it in English, and athletic shorts. He didn't even have socks or slippers on. And here was a detective in a button-up and tie and pressed slacks. At least Mr. Aizawa was dressed normally in his hero regalia. Please follow me. He felt like he was marching to his death. A teacher in his house. His mother had worked quickly, snacks and drinks were already waiting on the coffee table. She stood by the armchair, waiting for them. She smiled politely albeit nervously to their guests. Hello, I'm Midoriya Inko. It's a pleasure to meet you both. She gave a polite bow which was returned by the men. It's a pleasure to meet you too, Mrs. Midoriya. I'm Aizawa Shoyuda, your son's homeroom teacher. Mr. Aizawa introduced. If his mom was skeptical, she hit it well. He wasn't exactly what one would think of when thinking of a homeroom teacher. The one my son bonded to? She asked, motioning for them to take a seat on the couch. They sat in unison and Izuku went to stand by his mom as she sat in the armchair. Trust me, it came as a surprise. Students aren't usually very fond of me. I tend to be very strict and gruff. He still sounded as bewildered as he had 4 days ago when it happened. His mom gave his teacher a watery smile which alarmed both men. Well, He's no stranger to gruff individuals. I think he's mostly immune to bad tempers. He knew she was thinking of Kachin and Aunt Mitsuki. But I'm so glad he has someone he trusts so much and that he felt safe enough that his quirk activated and created a bond to you. That, to me, speaks greatly of the kind of man you are. She reached out and took a hold of Izuku's hand. His ears were burning with pleasant embarrassment. Mr. Aizawa had his face tilted down and tucked slightly behind his capture weapon, but Izuku could still see the blooming blush on the man's face. "You flatter me," Mr. Aizawa said awkwardly. He cleared his throat and lifted his head, but looked off to the side instead of directly at them. "But he's clearly bonded to All Might. So I'm not the only person in his life he trusts." His mom let out a snort and quickly covered her mouth as she giggled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh at you. But All Might? Izuku's adored him since he was 4. Of course he would bond to him. What child wouldn't? It's a given. The sun sets. The moon rises. And children adore All Might. It's only natural." His mother's laughter faded and she grew serious. "And I know my son loved heroes, he's a fanboy, but you are his teacher. And he's never been close to a teacher. Or another adult besides me. You've known him a handful of months. And in that time you've gained his trust. That is a big deal. Far bigger than him bonding to All Might. So yes, I flatter you because it's deserved." Izuku watched as emotions flickered across the hero's face. Mr. Aizawa wasn't a very emotive person, but he could tell his mother's words had an effect on the man. He blinked rapidly and clenched his fists a few times in his pants legs before clearing his throat and doing his best to hide behind his hair. "Well, thank you. But we're not here to discuss the bond." He deflected and motioned jerkily to the man beside him. Seeing his cue, the detective leaned forward a bit and introduced himself. "My name is Tsukachi Naomasa. I'm a detective for the Mizudafu police force, though I'm loaned out frequently to other precincts." His mother's hand tightened around his. "Is something wrong?" his mom asked worriedly. She looked up at Izuku, who shrugged, so she turned her attention back to the plain-looking man. He was dressed neatly, and his hair was perfectly combed, but he had bags under his eyes and his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "Yes, but nothing I feel you should be worried about," he reassured. His mom's death grip on his hand loosened and she sagged back into her seat. "I'm just here to ask a few questions in regards to the quirk doctor you took Izuku to when he was 5. I'll answer any questions you have, though it's been a long time since that day. And well, it was a very stressful day. I'm not sure I'll remember everything." He nodded and gave them a reassuring smile. "That's understandable. Now, seeing as this is an investigation, and I'll get into that monetarily, would it be all right if I record our conversation? I find it useful if I need to go over information again at a later date." They gave their affirmative and he continued. "Good." He pulled a small recorder from an inside pocket of his coat and set it on the table, pressing the record button. He stated the date and time, who was present, and then began the interview. Mr. Aizawa slumped back on the couch and appeared to fall asleep. Izuku was never sure if he was actually sleeping or not. When Recovery Girl, the school nurse of UA High, discovered that the imaging done on Izuku's foot when he was a child was not an actual image of his foot and that his diagnoses as quirkless had obviously been wrong, she began to try and collect all of Izuku's medical records, which include the name of the doctor he saw, Dr. Ujiko Tsubasa. However, when she went to look up information on this doctor to contact, she found that he had retired, which is not uncommon for someone of his age. However, upon further investigation, there was no phone number associated with his name, no email, and no forwarding address, which is concerning. All doctors are required to keep their information accessible to other practitioners in case they need to be reached regarding former patients. Tsukachi took a sip of the tea in front of him to help with his parched throat. So she went to Aizawa here and informed him. She also informed Nedzu. When Nedzu found nothing, I was contacted and began an investigation. He leaned forward, face serious. Here's where things get even more strange and unsettling. I cannot find anyone who had worked with him. His previous office has long since been shut down and remodeled into a tea shop. None of his previous employees can be found. He sold his home a year after you met him. His grandson, who he had custody of, is missing. And his son and daughter-in-law, who had been reported as dead and cremated after a car accident, have no burial site and no ashes have been recovered. For all intents and purposes, it's like he never existed. The only proof we have of him is through word of mouth. They sat in stunned silence. Never would they have thought that the persnickety old man that he had gone to would have been involved in such a shady life. He had seen all of Izuku's classmates, and Kenma Tsubasa had gone to school with him all throughout elementary and middle school. He knows they had moved homes, and that Tsubasa had a caretaker that lived in house with him because his grandfather had worked so much. But he hadn't heard that he had disappeared after middle school. Surely Kachin would have heard and said something if he'd known. What do you need to know? His mom asked shakily. Izuku gave her hand a reassuring squeeze and sat on the arm of the chair. What was your impression of him? Did he ever do or say anything that made you uncomfortable during your visit? Did he ever describe his quirk? The detective asked briskly. His mother thought back and frowned. I'm not sure. I was listening to him, but I was in shock. And truthfully, my focus was more on Izuku and how he was reacting. I've never been good at remembering the finer details of things. His mom looked up to him. Izuku, do you remember? You've always been very observant, even at that age. And I know you've always remembered that day vividly. The detective seemed to perk up as Izuku thought. In truth, a lot about that visit bothered him when he thought about it. He hadn't considered it as a child, but thinking back on it with a more mature perspective always left him feeling off. He was very apathetic. Izuku began. Which was strange, because most of my classmates had raved about him. He complimented their quirks and praised them all. He tilted his head as he thought. Some hair got into his eye and he brushed it away. His hair was getting long and needed trimming. A few complained that he didn't seem interested in their quirks. They had minor mutations or quirks that weren't impressive to others. Thinking back on it, he seemed only excited by the obviously powerful or flashy quirks. Ones that stood out. The detective nodded. He must have heard much of the same. Kenma, his grandson, never mentioned his grandfather's quirk. He didn't talk about him much other than to say he was hardly ever home. It was just Kenma and his caretaker most of the time. I don't know more about the caretaker. He hardly mentioned him other than to point out who took care of him. He really wasn't interested in me, the doctor that is. Hardly looked at me the whole visit. Since I had no obvious signs of a quirk, he just ordered an X-ray. No other tests. He asked about what generation quirk user my parents were. Seemed even less interested after that. His desk was crowded. Lots of folders and paperwork. He constantly moved them around. When he got my folder with the X-ray, he tossed it on the pile and messed with his computer for a few minutes while we waited. It looked like he was emailing someone. Then he grabbed the file, I'm thinking it was the wrong one, and placed it on the light board. Reaffirmed what generation user my parents were again and pointed to the second joint of the pinky toe and explained why I didn't have a quirk. Then he told me to give up. We left after that. Thank you. That's more detail than anyone else had been able or willing to give. The detective admitted. Give up what? Izuku startled at the sound of Mr. Aizawa's voice. He had been so still and so quiet the whole time that Izuku had begun to suspect he actually was asleep. Izuku shrugged and looked away, uncomfortable. I don't know. He didn't say. He pulled on his fingers, stuck in the memory of that day. Maybe on any dreams of being a hero? I was in an All Might shirt and had an All Might action figure. Maybe he meant to just give up in general? Life isn't kind to the quirkless. Maybe he was warning me not to. Expect anything but the bare minimum from society, if that. Izuku looked from under his lashes at his teacher. Mr. Aizawa wore a scowl and had his arms crossed tightly. He was wrong to tell you that. His teacher said firmly. In my opinion, as long as you work hard and put in the effort and don't be stupid, anyone, even someone quirkless, can be a hero. And everyone deserves the best treatment from those around them. Mr. Aizawa growled. Thankfully the interview was done, because both Midoriyas became literal fountains as they cried. It was alarming for the two men. And Aizawa was unwillingly, not really but he would never admit it, hugged and cried on. He endured Izuku's tearful and happy babble of thanks. He suffered it graciously, even going so far as to run a comforting hand through Izuku's wild curls. With the promise of keeping in touch, the detective fled their apartment with Mr. Aizawa hot on his heels. Hisashi was going to die from cuteness overload. The universe decided to bless him with the best thing ever. His grumpy cat of an on-again off-again boyfriend had an adorable kitten tailing him. The kitten being Shuta's accident-prone student who had imprinted on him like a duckling. He had been watching the two since the whole bonding thing had happened last week. Shoyuta was doing his best to prepare his kids' students for their work studies. It's safe to say, his DJ heart was gonna burst like a dropped disco ball. Midoriya was such an awkward little thing, and that made it all the more adorable. After homeroom, when Shoyuta made his escape to go sleep in the vents like a gremlin, Midoriya's eyes would trail after him, completely ignoring Hisashi's groovy entrances. Not that he's salty. He totally loves that his loner ally cat is getting some much-needed love. The kid looks pure disappointed that Shoyuta can't teach them every subject. Hisashi, being the nosy beach that he is, often spies on Shoyuta training his little crotch goblins. Midoriya is obviously trying to do his best to impress Shoyuta. Takes his advice to heart. Asks questions about their shared quirk. Takes endless notes. And looks starstruck anytime Shoyuta uses his quirk or snaps his capture weapon out with pinpoint accuracy. Hisashi can see Shoyuta struggling not to show favoritism. And it's hilarious. He's caught Midoriya trying to mimic the way Aizawa walks, all stealthy and cat-like. And Shuta's noticed too by how many times he has to tuck his face away to hide a pleased smile. And the awkward office visits where Midoriya wants Shuta's advice on his notes. The way he lights up and goes on mumbling tangents. Hisashi does not have adoption paperwork ready for Shoyuta to sign. No, he doesn't. Nemuri is a liar. Hisashi has been an unsympathetic friend this week as Shoyuta frets over the work studies everyone is attending for the weekend. All he can do is sit in their shared apartment and tease his friend about his son going all the way to Hosu for the weekend to stay with it. Hero Shoyuta doesn't know. You're just jealous because the only reason he's going is because All Might asked him to. Do I smell dash? Hisashi sniffed loudly and swung his head in a crescent, a custody battle brewing. The stress ball he took to the forehead was warranted but still rude. He rubbed his head where the ball had smacked him with all the force a foam ball thrown with deadly and purposeful accuracy can manage. Which wasn't much, but it still stung. Shoyuta was in his sleeping bag on the floor, pouting. I'm not jealous. All Might is having trouble teaching Izuku how to handle their quirk. It's not coming as naturally as Erasure does for him. He definitely sounded smug. So he's sending him to his old teacher in the hopes that he can help. He shrugged. It's only logical. Hisashi got up from where he was stretched across the couch and went to crouch in front of the most complicated man in his life. He poked a stubbed cheek. Babes, it's okay to be jelly. It's also okay to worry about your bone-breaking kid being hours away from you training his very dangerous quirk. Shoyuta pulled his face away and tucked it into his sleeping bag. I know. He groaned. And I can't do anything about it. I'm set to patrol Kabukicho. Fat is on a case and can't take the area this weekend. I can't go stalk the kid. Or any of them for that matter. Hisashi laughed and leaned down to plant a fond kiss on his currently off-again partner's forehead. Well, I was going to make you suffer for a few more hours, but you look absolutely pathetic, so I'll put you out of your misery. Black eyes stared up at him patiently, letting him have his theatrics. I'm off to Hosu first thing in the morning. Got a gig down there. So I'll be nearby in case Ida or Midoriya needs me. He got one of his favorite deranged smiles from Shoyuta. Have I told you I love you? Shoyuta asked. Only when I sneak you coffee in the hospital. Hisashi teased. They bantered like that until Shoyuta had to leave for patrol. The grump worried too much. How much trouble could the problem child get into during a work study? Everything was chaos and fire in every direction Izuku looked. He knows he was told to stay on the train, but that wasn't really practical. It was damaged and compromised. It was due to be evacuated. And then Izuku would be stranded with no way to return to Gran Torino's home. He didn't even have a key. The smart thing to do was to find Ida and stay close to him and the hero he was working with. Besides, he was very worried about Ida. He had been closed off since his brother's injury. His friend was hurting and he was worried he would do something stupid in his grief. He was right to be concerned. Manuel was alone and had lost Ida. Desperate, he raced off between the buildings. Stain had been in this area, so logically, if he worked his way around the area in a grid pattern, he should come across Ida. Thankfully, it didn't take long. He was still close to the main attack area. Unfortunately, he was also in the presence of Stain. And he was injured and about to be shish kebabbed. Because one Ida being stabbed in the back wasn't enough. With the force of a frantic and overpowered teenager, Izuku launched himself feet first at Stain, who was quick to dodge. He crouched down by Ida, calmly letting him know that he was there to help. Except for some reason the paralyzed boy didn't want his help and expected him to leave. "What in all might's left but cheek makes you think I'll leave you here?" Izuku hissed. Hand behind his back, he sent out his location hoping someone would get it and be near enough to help. He listened to Stain's rant about false heroes and purging society of them, all the while trying to think of a plan to get Ida and Native away alive. Hisashi was running as fast as he could. He had been in the studio when he got the alert about Nomu attacks. He'd been out the door as fast as he could go, ignoring the producer and host he had been visiting to do a show for. He couldn't use his quirk safely with so many people running around, so he set to work ushering civilians to safety. Then his phone dinged and all it was a location from none other than Shuta's problem child. And back to running he went. He cursed himself as he ran. He just had to go and jinx things by saying, what trouble could he get into? A Nomu attack is what? Why did his teenage self think leather pants was a good idea? He was chafing and had a horrible case of swamp butt. He rounded the corner just in time to see a crispy Stain get kicked by an engine-powered kid and an all-might level kid with erasure added for flavor. What the actual fuckery is happening? Not very demure. Not very cutesy. He let the three teens revel in their success as they tied up Stain and removed all his weapons. But where did he even keep those? Never mind. Not important. He pet his hip to the side, got ready to act like he didn't leave his breath a mile back, and called out, "Little listeners, what?" And I can't stress this enough, the F-dashed. Language. Ida immediately reprimanded. Midoriya looked like a deer caught in headlights. Todoroki looked unfazed, with the best resting beach face he's seen since Shoyuda. Hisashi waggled his finger as he walked over to them. "You can scold me for language when you learn to not break the law," he said lightly, trying not to traumatize them any more than they already were. But he had to stress the seriousness of what they just did. No licenses, kiddies. That means no hero work. This is considered, jazz hands, vigilantism. He tore the bottom half of his shirt off and quickly wrapped the stab wound on Ida's shoulder that was bleeding sluggishly. He looked the others over and deemed them not in critical condition. Ida immediately looked shamed-faced and pale. But that last bit could be due to the blood loss. Todoroki didn't seem to care. But he's Endeavor's son, so he probably knew he could get away with murder if he played his cards right. And Midoriya looked conflicted. Not the three he would peg as morally ambiguous, but he'll roll with it. So, here's how it's gonna play out. He whispered, pulling them away from Stain. "I ran into you three. You all got separated from your heroes. I gave you all permission to use your quirks in self-defense and ordered you to look for civilians and evacuate them as you made your way to safety. I stayed to help with evacuation. How did you all end up together? I went after Stain on my own." Ida admitted. "I was looking for Ida and Manuel since the train I was on got compromised. I figured it was safe to stay close to a hero since Gran Torino went off to help. Went looking for Ida when I found out he was missing. Went looking for him because this is not the time to be off on your own." Midoriya apparently was rational. "I got Midoriya's text and left my father to go find him. I told my father he was probably in trouble and to come once he was done. Todoroki was something else. Not sure what. But he was something. Okay. Hisashi would unpack all of that later. You three got separated. Ida ran into Stain and vengefully decided to fight him because of his brother and because there was a victim. Ida's guilty look let him know he hadn't even noticed native. Shoyuta was going to have his hands full. Midoriya found you. Sent out his location. And Todoroki informed Endeavor and was allowed, we're gonna say allowed, to go to your aid. So no laws broken. And if someone named Tsukachi asks about this, tell him to confirm it with me. That will let him know to go along with the lie. Any questions? He didn't let them ask any. No. Midoriya, Todoroki, get native. I'll get Stain. Ida, try not to bleed too much. Getting Stain to the end of the ally was hard, he had lots of spikes hidden on him. So maybe all leather wasn't so bad. Gran Torino was short. And old. And Endeavor was late to the party. And mad. And loud. With a nice but, not that he was looking. Apparently getting distracted by a hot but was a bad idea, because he didn't notice the Nomo flying. None of them did, but still. No buts while working. And it just had to grab the problem child. He would scream if it wouldn't be an astronomically bad idea. He raced forward after it, hoping to at least be able to break the little listener's fall if he got loose. No one expected Stain to get loose and stab the thing through the brain. He grabbed Midoriya around the waist and hoisted them up onto the rapidly falling dead Nomu. It crashed to the ground and slid a few feet. Stain jumped from its back with Midoriya still in his grasp, but gently set the kid down on the pavement, eyes darting over him before stepping away. Hisashi had to duck as a wave of fire shot over him and Endeavor roared. Stain ducked as well and unleashed such murderous intent that many were frozen and brought to their knees. But Shuta's kid was behind Stain, and Hisashi wasn't going to leave him there unprotected, even if Stain didn't seem inclined to do Midoriya any harm. So with shaky legs he staggered past a ranting Stain who gave him a look of approval as he passed. He collapsed to his knees in front of a shocked and hurt Midoriya and pulled him into his arms and rested his chin on a mop of sweaty and unruly curls. He kept a white-knuckle grip on the back of his little listener's hero suit, afraid something else might come and endanger his student. I got you, Kit. You're safe now. I'm here. He felt Midoriya shudder in his arms and so he pulled him tighter to his chest while being mindful of the claw marks in his shoulders. The Nomu, he said with a hitched breath. It's Kenma Tsubasa. He had no words for him. What could he say? He'd heard Shoyuta speak on the Tsubasa case. Now they might know what had happened to the grandson. It was quiet behind him, and when he glanced over his shoulder, he saw that Stain had passed out standing up. Things moved quickly after. He rode with Midoriya to the hospital. He had passed out too when the paramedics had lifted him onto a stretcher. At the hospital, Midoriya was immediately taken back to surgery. Ida was stitched up but refused to have surgery on his shoulder. Todoroki was mostly fine and Endeavor left him to make his own way home once released. When Midoriya was brought back, he sat beside his bed and held his hand, hoping that even unconscious, he might be able to take some comfort from it. He scolded Ida harshly now that they were safe, but made sure to let him know his pain and grief were understandable. That his actions were understandable. Not acceptable, but understandable. Bright green eyes blinked up at him, and he put his phone away to give the kid his undecided attention. He'd text Shoyuta later. He knew his kid was fine and that's all that mattered right now. He took Midoriya's hand and rubbed soothing circles on the back of it. Hey kid, how you feeling? He asked, keenly aware that two sets of curious eyes were watching. Izuku blinked some more as he registered the question. He took quick stock of his condition before answering. Sore. He croaked. Present Mike let go of his hand, leaving him feeling bereft, but held a cup of water with a straw up to his mouth. He took careful sips, not wanting to make himself sick. Do you remember what happened? Mike asked as he put the cup away. He took Izuku's hand again and it made him feel oddly comforted. It was soothing, like how his mom would hold his hand. He nodded his head then winced as it alerted him to the beginnings of a headache. Do you want me to go over it? Nah, Mike said. Just making sure there are no gaps in your memory. Trauma can do that. Not to mention you just had surgery and have pain meds in your system. His mustache bristled as he gave a cheeky grin. You're lucky you're hurt and had made good decisions, more or less, or else you would get a scolding like Ida did. Izuku frowned. But don't want him to be in trouble. He was just hurting. And Todoroki only came because we needed help. Mike laughed. Relax. Todoroki told Endeavor exactly what he was doing, and while not happy he ran off on his own, he's not displeased by his bravery or prowess. Ida's punishment is being hurt, and whatever disciplinary actions his parents decide to dole out. But that's nothing considering he almost died. I'm not too pleased that you all wound up in danger, but I understand that shit happens. Mike leaned over and looked Izuku in the eyes. Being a hero, even a hero in training comes with danger, but please be more careful. Value your life a little more. I've already told them this, and I'm telling you now, you are 15. Leave things to the adults unless you have no other choice. Did you have no other choice? Izuku hung his head. At the time, I didn't think I did. But now I know I should have forced Manuel to come with me. I thought it was best to leave him to fight the fires. But I should have told him what I thought Ida was doing. Maybe he would have come willingly, or sent someone with me. That's right. Mike agreed. You live and you learn. And you are all alive and have learned. I'm sorry, Midoriya. Todoroki. My anger blinded me and I was selfish. I foolishly thought I could succeed where my brother failed. Because I was filled with what I thought was righteous fury and that I was capable of anything because I was so angry. I endangered both of you and I beg for your forgiveness. Ida pleaded with tears dripping down his face. Izuku smiled fondly at his stern classmate. I forgive you. That's what friends are for after all. I think you're both crazy. Todoroki muttered. But still, I'd like to be friends. And friends look out for each other when one is being stupid. Izuku jumped when Present Mike started laughing and soon he and the others were too. Explaining things to Shoyuta when Hisashi got home was hectic and he had to restrain him from running off to throttle his students. They were definitely getting detentions. He was also scheduling them sessions with Hound Dog. And he had also caught Shoyuta reading an ebook on how to parent troubled teens. Their apartment wasn't big enough for him to adopt all his students. Because that's what was going to happen. The big softy was wrapped around their fingers. Not to mention that general education kid he had his eye on. For someone unwilling to commit to adopting a cat, he was sure willing to adopt a bunch of teenagers. Monday rolled around too soon in Izuku's opinion. It was time to face the music. He just hoped that Mr. Aizawa wasn't too disappointed in him. Or worse, ashamed of him. What if he didn't want Izuku bothering him anymore? What if he decided he wasn't cut out for the hero course anymore? It was rude, but he couldn't find it in himself to talk with his friends. Uraraka kept asking about his work studies, but all he could do was look down at his desk and try not to cry. Ida kept giving him knowing glances and he could feel Todoroki's eyes burning holes into his back. Even Kacchan turned around at one point to give him a searching look. When the classroom door opened he felt his stomach drop to his feet. Mr. Aizawa didn't address them or scold them in front of the class. He just did roll call as he did every morning. Izuku couldn't look up. He didn't want to see the look of disgust he had grown used to seeing from adults in Mr. Aizawa's eyes. He couldn't handle this. The suspense of not knowing if he had ruined his relationship with the only teacher who had ever cared about him. Present Mike seemed fond of him now. He had held his hand and stayed with him until he was discharged. Even though he was expected to help host a radio show. He had rescheduled with them even though there was no reason for him to stay. But he didn't want to have to replace Mr. Aizawa, even if Mike was really nice and funny. He felt like he was going to be sick. When his name was reached on the roster, he bolted. He reached the bathroom in record time and he heaved into the toilet. His body couldn't settle on feeling chilled or warm and it was making him feel even worse. His whole body ached and his legs hurt. It felt like the worst flu ever. Had he caught something at the hospital? He heaved again. Izuku. It was Mr. Aizawa. He couldn't do this now. Why did he have to follow? Izuku, can you let me in? He wanted to. He wanted Mr. Aizawa's reassurance so bad right now. But he felt awful. He'd thrown up. His nose was running. He's pretty sure he was running a fever. Had probably fractured his legs on his mad dash here, which would PSS recovery girl off. He felt gross. And he was scared. And he wasn't sure Mr. Aizawa would forgive him for being such a problem child. I'm coming in. His teacher informed him. No, He shouted, closing his eyes against the tears. The walls shook and he heard a crack. There was a curse behind him and he heard the door rammed open. Then he felt empty. He wasn't hot and cold anymore. His legs didn't hurt but were still kind of sore. His throat felt raw more than it had earlier. He rubbed his face with his sleeve and turned to face his teacher with teary eyes. Shuda's problem child was going to give him gray hairs. He had run out of class like a bat out of hell, the smell of exhaust fumes and smoke trailing after him. There was even ice on the floor. Him sideways. He had bonded to Ida and Todoroki and was now getting a double dose of quirk. It took his ultimate glare to keep those two in their seats. Even Bakugu had to be glared into SBMSN. The boy looked a mix of odd and murderous. And that would be a problem for the Shoyuda of tomorrow. Today's Shoyuda had a runaway problem child to deal with. He knew to expect the heat and ice. He knew to expect engines in the kid's legs. Vomit was not expected. And it was concerning. Izuku, he called gently. He was used to vomiting teenagers, unfortunately. So he knew to be gentle. When he got no answer, he asked to be let in. When he still got no answer, he told him he was coming in. He also did not expect the powered yell of no. Hisashi had not mentioned that it was possible Izuku would bond to his loud mouth. And when the bathroom stall shook and he heard the porcelain toilet crack, he slammed the door open, breaking the lock. He activated his quirk and breathed a sigh of relief when all the quirks shut off. Tearful green eyes looked up at him. He looked so scared. He deactivated his quirk and crouched down in front of his kid. He gave a gentle smile and tried to lightly joke to ease the poor kid. Maybe one day we'll have a peaceful homeroom. You don't hate me? Izuku asked weakly. He was trembling like a leaf. Why would I hate you? He asked cautiously. He carefully took his sleeve and cleaned Izuku's face. Because of the trouble I caused at the work studies. Izuku whispered. He was still pale and his freckles were stark against his cheeks. I was worried. I'm frustrated. A little disappointed. But that's nothing to be scared of. There will be times in your life that you will make me mad. And that's okay. Because I will never hate you. Shoyuda reassured. I care for you. And no matter how frustrating you may be at times, I will always care about you, problem child. Izuku slammed into his chest and he pulled him tight. His poor kid feared that at the first mistake Shoyuda would wash his hands off him. He'd have to work on curbing him off that notion. He wasn't going anywhere. A weight flopped onto his back and a gloved hand reached around him to card through soft green curls. I heard the yell. Hisashi whispered softly, a smile in his voice. I practically danced all the way here. Jiro pointed me here. So, can we set up a room for him and arrange shared custody with his mom? Green eyes peered up at them in wonder. He snorted and tucked the kid's head down and rubbed his prickly stubble against soft curls. We'll have to arrange custody with the Idas and the Todorokis too. They'll have to fight me. Hisashi growled. Can't we just steal their kids too and call it a day? We can't steal kids. Shoyuda reasoned, grinning when he felt Izuku chuckle into his chest. If there's a will, there's a way. And we have a way. He's called Netsu. Hisashi whispered into his ear, knowing he was ticklish there. He tried to move his head away but that just earned him a nip to the ear. The bratty man-child. Shoyuda just rolled his eyes. Soon, he would need to take Izuku to Recovery Girl. Update his paperwork. Inform Mrs. Midoriya that his situationship Kakuto roommate and fellow hero and teacher was also an important part of Izuku's life as another trusted adult. But for now they could just sit in the ruined bathroom stall. With a boy who he was beginning to regard as a son in his arms and the man he loved in a confusing way pressed to his back. Maybe letting people in wasn't such a bad thing for him and for Izuku. Izuku had somehow fallen into the Twilight Zone. He had to be there. Or maybe Nirvana. He couldn't make up his mind if this was absolute bliss or a nightmare conjured straight from Stephen King's mind. He'd often dreamed of heroes fighting over who got to have him. It was 90% a dream of them fighting to have him work at their agencies, and a small 10% that he will deny ever imagining of them fighting over being his lovers. None of ones he was watching at the moment, thank goodness, fell into the last category. Still, he was leaning more towards this being a nightmare. because Endeavor trying to argue for more custody of him could not be reality or anything other than a nightmare. Him arguing against not only his mom, thoughts and prayers, the man would need them, but arguing against All Might, Mr. Aizawa, Present Mike and the Idas. He felt far too small to be metaphorically tugged back and forth by such larger-than-life people. The slime villain must have killed him. There is no way this is his life right now. Endeavor was looming in a love seat that looked 3 sizes too small for him. Outdated and worn compared to his light blue linen suit, pale cream cotton button-down shirt, and brown leather Oxfords. They looked expensive. Tailored to perfection. Probably worth more than the love seat. Maybe even the whole apartment. He was glaring at All Might, as if he was the only one who was opposing his skewed custody arrangement. Thankfully his flame beard was turned off. He's not sure the smoke detectors could handle his presence if he was full Fire Lord. Does he have smoke detectors at his home? How would that even work? All Might, who Izuku adored, looked ridiculous in his garish yellow pinstriped suit. Izuku felt like a traitor just thinking that. But it's true. He seemed even more ridiculous considering he was sat, in full All Might form, on a small stool that his mom used when dusting. But he had insisted that Aizawa and Present Mike take the couch beside his mom, even though he held more seniority than the both of them. But it was such an All Might thing to do. Izuku had been instructed more than once during their lunches to take the couch while he sat on a stool or small chair. He was just that kind. The number 1 hero didn't seem to be bothered in the least by the glare being sent his way. Mr. Aizawa was Mr. Aizawa. He wore his normal hero outfit that he wore every day. It's not like he needed to impress his mom, since Izuku had bonded to the man he had been around more than once. Especially since Izuku had obtained more quirks. Most days the man would come over after school or patrol to help him not only study up on his new quirks, but to practice them safely. His mom practically force-fed his teacher, who after working with Izuku stayed to work on the tests for the upcoming exams and often crashed on the couch. He had bathroom necessities stored here just for those nights he couldn't be bothered to go home. No, Mr. Aizawa had no need to impress his mom. She's practically adopted him already. Aizawa, true to form, was practically asleep at the moment. Which could be a ruse, or could be his unbothered nature. Clearly he was not worried about Endeavor's ludicrous ramblings. That, or he had plans to kill the man if he got his way. One could never be sure about what went on inside Shoyuta Aizawa's head. Present Mike was the main one arguing with Endeavor. He seemed to take offense to him. He was leaned forward, like he was just waiting for the excuse to jump him. The man had to catch himself more than once when he went to curse in English, Inko Midoriya's most icy stare that even worked on Kaken, silencing him faster than Ingenium. While Endeavor and Aizawa were on opposite ends of the spectrum, in terms of attire. Present Mike, call me Papa, was his own spectrum entirely. He wore whitewashed jeans that looked way too tight to be comfortable. Black knee-high boots that had a small wedge heel to them, as if he needed to be any taller. The disposable plastic shoe covers made them look ridiculous. A faded Guns N' Roses tee that had a few artful holes in it. A cherry red leather jacket with matching red square framed glasses. His hair was in a half-down half-bun. And the nail on each middle finger was painted black. He looked like a rebellious teen. Not gonna lie, it was kinda cool. But he could see his mom's disapproval, so he made sure to keep all traces of awe off his face. The Idas were dressed normally. They sat a bit awkwardly side by side on the kitchen chairs that had been brought to the living room. Mr. Ida wore a mint green polo with khakis and loafers. He looked like a regular dad just out for a visit. Mrs. Ida was a little more dressed up than her husband. She wore a very attractive yellow sundress with a braided belt tied loosely around her waist. The dress had white lace trim at the bottom that looked hand-stitched but still very elegant and natural to the dress. A light brown sweater covered her shoulders and arms. It looked so soft, he wondered where she had gotten it. He'd love to get his mom one for her birthday. She wore gold sandals that were slightly wedged. He suspected it was so she would be more level with her husband, who was at least a few inches taller than her. He had had all this time to observe them because he could not get his head around the absurdity of heroes trying to decide who got him and when. because apparently having these quirks meant that he should learn how to manage them from the source. Aizawa would teach him his, which he made sure to do during school and at Izuku's home already. So not much needed to change there unless Izuku wanted to spend time at Aizawa's home. Present Mike very much wanted Izuku to learn from him at his home where he could spoil his favorite little listener. And also because he had paid to have it soundproofed enough to muffle any accidental shouts. So they could practice low-level sounds there while louder and more dangerous ones could be practiced at school. All Might figured they could train on the weekends, like they had secretly done before all of this. Not that anyone knew that but the two of them, though he let Izuku know that he was more than welcome to come over to his home anytime. If he fanboys any closer to the sun he might melt like Icarus. All freakin' Might's house. Again? Possibly Nirvana and Endeavor's just there for comedic relief? The Idas felt that learning at school with their son's help was more than enough but would very much like Izuku to visit and have sleepovers with Tenya. Izuku was his first friend, and they were honored that Izuku now shared his quirk. Izuku wanted to cry. His first sleepover invitation. Endeavor wanted Izuku to spend at least 4 nights out of the week at his residence so he could safely be trained. He did not trust his son to teach him how to wield fire considering his son only just started to use it himself. Obviously everyone shot Endeavor down. And thus the schedule was made. Eventually, Sunday and Monday with his mom. That's 2 days back to back. 1 whole day with him. She gets to see him off to school for the first day of the week and he spends the night with her. Tuesdays and Wednesdays are Present Mike and Aizawa's days. Tuesdays Izuku spends the night after school to practice with Mick's quirk. Wednesday they all have dinner at Izuku's house and Aizawa trains him in the nearby park until curfew. Mike will probably go home after dinner and Aizawa will probably just crash on the couch. So Wednesday is basically a shared day for Aizawa and Izuku's mom. Thursday is either a free day for Izuku to choose where he wants to go, or a sleepover day with the Idas. And finally, Fridays and Saturdays are Endeavor's days. Shudo, because they're on a first-name basis now, is going to possibly murder his father. Izuku will be blind when that happens. He didn't realize how tense he was until everyone but his mom and Aizawa had left. His shoulders sagged and he felt like his bones were made of lead. He felt heavy and tired and like he had just played a game of hide and seek with a tiger. A heavy hand landed in his hair and he couldn't help the involuntary flinch. The hand was quick to retract and Izuku peeked over to see Aizawa watching him over his capture scarf. His face was as blank as ever, but Izuku had spent enough time with the man now to take note of the hint of concern in his dark eyes. Aizawa placed his hand on the back of the couch, near Izuku but giving him space. "You alright, problem child?" he asked softly. They could hear Izuku's mom puttering in the kitchen, stress cooking. Izuku gave a feeble nod and tried to smile, but it felt like his mouth didn't want to listen. The corners just barely ticked up and he quickly turned away before Aizawa could see him grimace. "I'm fine." "Really?" Izuku placated, thumbing a loose thread in the arm of the couch. Izuku heard Aizawa hum behind him. "Non-committal." Izuku hoped he would leave it be, but he should have known better. "Doesn't seem like you are," he accused. Izuku stayed silent. "Don't think I didn't notice you zoning out for the whole conversation." Izuku slunk down in his seat. "I wasn't zoned out. Just listening and observing." He defended. Even though he doesn't think he could have spoken even if he wanted to. It felt like a constrictor was wrapped around his throat and any time he even considered speaking up, it tightened its hold. "You had just as much say as anyone else today," Aizawa pointed out. "And as shy as you can be, it's never kept you quiet. You didn't so much as even mumble." Izuku crossed his arms across his chest, like he could hide behind them from the words his teacher was saying. His face was red with embarrassment. He's not sure why he was embarrassed, he just was. He didn't want to think on it. Didn't want to have this conversation. Aizawa sighed beside him and Izuku felt him shift his weight. "Do you want to talk about what you're feeling?" the man offered. Izuku adamantly shook his head no. "Can I make guesses then? And you can nod yes or no if I'm right." It was an olive branch. Izuku reached out with a careful nod yes. It was quiet for a moment. His scruffy teacher deep in thought. Izuku could feel his sharp eyes on him. Watching him. picking him apart and using everything he knew about Izuku to build his theories. You flinched because you were overwhelmed. I've noticed that you have trouble accepting physical touch at times, mostly if it's not choreographed or it's unexpected. And it's worse if you are anxious. As sharp as a knife and right to the quick. Izuku nodded. He hadn't meant to flinch, he liked Aizawa's head pats. But it had taken him by surprise, and once the man had given him space, he realized he wasn't really comfortable with being touched right then. Right now. He nodded to let Aizawa know he was right. Nothing wrong with that. Touch is optional and not something anyone is entitled to. I'm not offended, by the way. That made Izuku feel better. He knew Aizawa's love language was sarcasm and touch. He had felt bad for rejecting the affection. You flinched, and while I was momentarily caught off guard, I knew it wasn't about me, but about what you needed. And I know that when you're ready to receive affection again, you'll come to me. Much like a cat, Izuku thought. As for why you are shutting down, I can only assume that this was all too much. Too soon. He hit the nail on the head. Izuku slumped more and pulled his legs up so he could wrap his arms around his knees. It had been too much too soon. He had 3 new quirks to contend with, 3 new bonds. He had barely wrapped his head around the fact that he had adopted another teacher and had become so close to Shudo and Tenya. He had been isolated his whole life because of the distaste others had for him. It had been so bizarre to suddenly have friends in high school when his last friend had been when he was a small child. And Kachin had made him especially wary of friendships and their fragility. Not to mention he trusted adults about as far as he could throw them back when he was quirkless. Which was not far at all. Aizawa had proven himself by nearly dying for him and his classmates. By coming to school bandaged and broken, just to put them all at ease. How could he not give all his trust to this man? Present Mike, while cool and funny, hadn't proven himself the same way. But he had wormed his way into Izuku's heart by just being himself. By looking after Izuku after Stain. His obvious worry was so genuine that he couldn't help label the man as a safe adult. And Shudo was so awkward and knew less than Izuku did about being friends and social clues. It was easy to trust someone who was so bluntly honest. And Tenya, despite their rocky beginning, was just as awkward as them. He was blunt, but in a softer way than Shudo. Strict and stringent. He was tender-hearted where Shudo was closed-hearted. And somehow they had made room in their hearts for a boy they barely knew. Maybe Izuku is selfish, but he didn't want to let go of them. Maybe it was a trauma bond from fighting a serial killer together. Or maybe he felt safe with them. 3 broken boys. Broken in different ways. But still willing to help patch each other up. It was a lot to come to terms with. And having so many pro-heroes in his small home, all who wanted to help him and get to know him, was too much too. He sort of knew Present Mike. But the man was a lot to deal with. He didn't know Endeavor, and really didn't want to get to know him. But he couldn't say that without betraying Shudo's trust. He's sure the Idas are good people. They raised Tenya after all. But he hasn't had to deal with parents of a friend since Kachin, and as much as he loves Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru, he's never actually spent all that much time with them or in their home. He always felt out of place in Kachin's nice 2-story house with designer everything. He can only imagine how the Idas live. And he can't help but feel like their ready acceptance of him has less to do with him being Tenya's first friend and more to do with them wanting to distract their son from his brother's condition. But he's not sure if he can say all this. Or should. Maybe it's something he has to deal with as things happen. He knows Aizawa will listen to him. Knows he will give good advice and help him solve what can be solved. But he just doesn't want to talk about it. Or think about it. He would have been fine figuring out these quirks at school during training. He's doing it already for OFA. But he also knows that it's safer to accept help. Just know that I'm here for you if you want to talk. And if not, I'm still here for you. Aizawa tells him. He doesn't press for more and turns his attention away from Izuku to turn on the television. It's the news, and Izuku lets himself get lost in the sting of information. Weather, sales, traffic, hero fights. Before he knows it, he's at the kitchen table, eating grilled fish and kimchi with rice. He doesn't talk, but listens as his mom chats with Aizawa. They talk about today. The schedule. She worries. But she always worries. Aizawa is quick to soothe her. He knows these people. He's watching. Nezu's watching. If Izuku is ever uncomfortable, then he doesn't have to see them again. Izuku wonders how true that is. Is that to placate his mom? He doesn't think Aizawa would say something if it wasn't 100% true. But is it really that easy? Can he take that out? It's a relief. If Endeavor goes too far with training, Izuku can just leave and not see him ever again. He feels guilty. A bit. Shudo doesn't have that luxury. But from what the two-tone boy had said, he ignores his father nearly all the time now and hasn't trained with him in a long time. And Endeavor hasn't pushed him to. Maybe this is the man's way to try and entice his son back into training. Or just a way to bond and be closer to his son who obviously doesn't like him. But can Izuku really just refuse to train too? Shudo wouldn't blame him. But can Izuku live with backing down like that? His mom notices his quiet and tries to include him, but Aizawa shuts that down and whispers something to her. Izuku keeps his eyes down so he can't see what expression she makes. She sends him off to bathe, stating that Aizawa can do the dishes. The man half-heartedly grumbles but puts up no resistance as she pushes him into the kitchen. Izuku suspects she plans to interrogate his teacher. But he's too tired to give it any attention. He spends a long time under the shower. The hot water is soothing. The shower seat is a little uncomfortable after sitting on it for so long, but he can't find the energy or will to shut the water off and get up. He traces the scars on his hand and fingers. Not thinking, just feeling the raised edges and the places that sink lower and deeper where the skin was too mangled to be properly stitched back together. He's sleepy. But he's not ready to leave the comfort of the bathroom just yet. The shh of the shower is loud against the tiles and drowns out all sound in the apartment. Swarm. It won't be when he shuts the water off. He wants to stay in this bubble of steam. His hand closes around the knob and he shuts the cold off, feeling the hot burn of the water for a split second before he turns that off too. The cold immediately sets in and his knees protest as he stands. He towels off and dresses quickly, the cold chasing away the peace he had found. When he steps outside, it's to find Aizawa leaning against the wall. He doesn't say anything about the long shower, or the fact that the hot water is mostly used up. He just steps past Izuku and goes to take his own shower. Izuku walks away once he hears the water cut back on. His bed is warm, not as warm as the shower. But it's nice. He's bundled up and ready for sleep. But sleep isn't ready for him. He's not sure how long he lays there. He don't look at his all-night clock. He doesn't check his phone. He just lays there and waits. And waits. He grows more tired. His brain feels like it's moving through molasses. He can feel a headache brewing. The floor is cold to his bare feet when he finally gets out of bed. He stands there for a second, feeling foolish and like a small child. He considers getting back in bed and just laying there until morning. Headache bead med. But it's like his door calls to him. He walks quietly, feet padding near silently against the hardwood floor. His door creaks because of course it does. He's convinced Aizawa did something to make it noisy. It didn't used to be like that. It's dark in the hall, but he knows his way. Many late-night snack heists work to guide his feet. It's dark in the living room save for the light from the stove that his mom leaves on peeking from around a corner. It barely illuminates the room and creates shadows that climb the walls. Aizawa is asleep on the couch. He's covered in a blanket because his mom refuses to let him use his sleeping bag indoors. He crouches and looks at his teacher's face, debating just going back to his room. The blanket moves and lifts and Izuku nearly topples over in his shock. The blanket is held aloft. An invitation. The couch is too small. They're both too big. It won't be comfortable. Izuku climbs under the blanket and tucks himself tightly next to the man he's been thinking of as a father. The blanket and a heavy arm settle around him. It's warmer than his bed was. It feels safer. He takes a deep breath, eyelids feeling heavier than they had earlier. Aizawa smells like licorice and pine and aftershave. A chin, less scruffy than usual, settles on top of his head. Want to talk about it? Comes the nearly slurred question. Aizawa sounds half asleep. Izuku considers saying no again. He doesn't. If it's too much, I can just come home. Go back to how things were with just you and Mom. This isn't mandatory. Just something we're trying out. You can stop at any time. Aizawa yawns and pulls him closer. Anytime. Day or night. You call me and I'll get you and we'll go home. Okay. Izuku whispers. His mind feels more settled than it has in days. He's half asleep when he feels the kiss to the top of his head. It doesn't embarrass him. It's not weird or awkward. It feels safe. The same way it does when his mom kisses his cheek. Like Aizawa had always been here and done this. Like he's always been Izuku's dad. Morning is warm. Soft humming from his mom nearby. A rough hand gently carding through his hair. Whatever comes from his new situation. He knows that it will be okay. He can always come home.